what makes you wax nostalgic for some stuff?
Mm, I kind of agree with what Kelly said about tables and charts, actually. Um, but as far as the old school movement, I mean, the term old school to me evokes the idea of a system that's a little more stripped down, a little less rules heavy, and a little more deadly, quite frankly. I mean, there was always the possibility, especially once you started kind of hitting the mid to high level plateau of play, that you're going to get hit with some kind of an effect that is going to permanently kill or maim you in some way. And I think the further that gaming has gone along, the less likely that actually is to happen, and not just in the D&D derivatives, but in other games too, where character death is kind of taboo, almost. I mean, there are some systems that gear a little bit more toward it. World of Darkness, I think, breaks that taboo, especially if you're mortal. But modern fantasy games just don't seem to be that lethal, at least not the stuff that is aimed at a mass commercial audience. But also the rules light aspect of it, just a DM not having to consult big ass books and not having to flip through pages and pages of rules to satisfy a player at a table. It was an era where the GM said, okay, it's going to work like this, and we're going to move on. And that's one thing that I like about it, because then the element of trust and friendship has to be there in a game group for people to stay together and play.
Well spoken on that. And as far as, from my aspect, it's basically the same as you, Richard. I had a tight-knit group of friends that we played, with regularly, first wargaming, then playing Dungeons and Dragons. So we enjoyed the aspect of, a tight, group of friends, having a good time and stuff like that. Plus, too, we were old war gamers at the time, too, so we were used to looking at charts and stuff like that, and that was kind of our, turn on for that. So, we would, manufacture characters, put a Tolkien-esque name to them, and let them go until they ended up getting killed. When we first started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and a lot of groups did this, we took multiple characters. So, I had my little group of 3, and a friend of mine had his little group of 3, and we'd all go down there and enjoy it like that. But it was a lot of good memories, and a lot of just simply dungeon crawling, and the heck with the story, was kill something, kind of attitude. But anyway, kind of throwing this out, now that we've kind of defined what nostalgia means to us, have any of you played a system that kind of is a throwback to old school gaming at all? Tom, Kelly?
No, not really. I'm reading a system right now that is, but I haven't played one that is.
Which system is it that you're looking at?
Let's see. Adventure Conqueror King system.
They're local, aren't they?
Yeah, right here.
Oh yeah.
It's very neat. It's very second ed. They just cleaned the rules up a little bit, but the feel is still there. It felt like I was in the early mid-90s reading it again for the first time.
Ah, nice. I've heard some good things about it, but I never really understood, what the mechanics were all about or anything like that. So I didn't know it was kind of a play off of an older system. Because I know
the way it was described. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
The way it was described to me by the person that loaned us the book is that it starts off very old school D&D.
Yes.
And then you start, as you get higher level or more experience, you become the conqueror. So you're conquering land and establishing yourself, and then it's kingdom.
It becomes a resource management game.
Yeah.
At the very end of it, but if you just want the old school feel with slightly cleaner rules and a THACO that works like an armor class, so you're not counting backwards, it's this book. And if you like the resource management, that's great. Keep playing to a higher level if you live that long. but it makes reasons why there are dungeons there, because you're really creating things like monster traps.
Ah,
And if you die, oh well, then there's an empty dungeon for someone else.
I like that.
nice.
I'm excited about it. What about you, baby?
I kind of lost that nostalgia a long time ago, you know. Uh, and I haven't really found a system that I look at and I say, man, I got to play this and have it be like that. Do you know what I mean? When I read the rules to systems that emulate first or basic, or the first games like Star Frontiers and D&D and basic D&D, and I really don't find the systems fun. It's like sure, it's fun to go back and visit and look at, but I haven't cracked open the red box that I have on my shelf yet. Because if I did it, it'd be for novelty, not because I really want to sit down and play a campaign of kicking in the door.
Ah. So you've kind of you felt that you've kind of evolved out of that style of play, and more modern or more up to date games are what you like to play.
I guess I don't know if it's really evolving. I think we overcomplicate things. We're too complex with this at times. But I would love to sit down and play. It's just when I start to read the rules again, I'm like, really? Okay. So I mean, I'm kind of in that I'm in that middle space. I really miss it, and I think I would have fun doing it. But actually, getting the motivation to sit down and do it is something else.
Hmm. I see that, and actually, I understand the thought too. To be honest with you, the first game that I had that could be considered that I seen that could actually be considered a retro game was Hackmaster, and at the time I wasn't really into the role playing bit. I was kind of in one of my blue periods in between hobbies, and I was looking at Hackmaster, and I thought, oh, this try kind of strikes me as pretty close to old second edition, but I always thought it's kind of one of those games that you buy for the novelty sake of it. It's making fun of a game, and you're just simply playing into the tropes of the Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. And although it was a funny concept to me, I just never really wanted to explore it with a kind of game like that.
Right.
But Richard, how about you?
I agree with Tom in part. Systems like Labyrinth Lord and Dark Dungeons, even though they do a really good job of emulating old systems, and there should be a place for that. There should be people exploiting those loopholes in the OGL to keep this stuff free and available. But I don't feel jazzed up by that. But there are two exceptions that I've actually had some hands-on experience with. One, which Eric will probably echo me in a few minutes, is Castles and Crusades. A very stripped-down, dungeon crawl-oriented game that manages to take kind of the best of old school games and the best of kind of more modern concepts, and mix them together and create a beautiful palette of gaming and stuff that's really take it or leave it. With, a lot of options for the GM to customize the way he wants to run things at his table. And the genius of Castles and Crusades is in its core mechanic, which is that everything in the game works the same instead of being artificially separated. You don't have attack rolls which are different from saving throws, which are different from ability score checks. It's all based on your ability scores. It's all roll a die and add a bonus. And there might be minor situational modifiers that affect that, but generally speaking, the main things that are going to affect it are, is this a prime requisite, and what's your level? And that makes it really easy for players to get it, okay, to do anything in this game, all I have to do is roll an ability check. Makes it simple and intuitive. The other exception is Swords and Wizardry. Swords and Wizardry is a brilliant restatement of, I guess we would call it white box D&D. So I'm going a little crazy because I'm hearing myself on someone's speaker, so that's why I'm stuttering a lot. So I'll just kind of go deaf for a second. Swords and Wizardry is a really good restatement of white box D&D, but it also deviates from it in certain ways. So it'll simplify saving throws by it only being one number that every character rolls against. But then including a sidebar table saying, hey, the original game actually broke saving throws down into 5 categories. If you want to play that way, here it is. We find the game runs a lot more smoothly by streaming it down to this option. It also lets you use old negative scale armor class, but then gives the supplemental rules for positive scale and integrates that directly into the stat block for every monster that's published for the game. So old school armor classes, they're playing in front of you, and then in brackets you have your new school armor class. And it does a good job of explaining why the game was structured the way it was in the 70s, but also explaining why modern players might want to deviate from it, and more importantly, the consequences for players and GMs if you make those changes. And that's one thing that I really like about the system. So there's my picks. What do you got, Eric?
With me, I'm like you, Richard. You know, my best experience so far, you know, with the newer retro games has been Castles and Crusades, much for the reasons that you state. It's a very easy game to play, but still, even reading through the books or playing the game itself, it kind of really evokes an old school feel, which is fantastic. I have played Labyrinth Lord before, and I'm like Tom in a lot of ways. And I went through and read the book. It just struck me as, okay, this is kind of a rehash of what I kind of left. And when I was playing a campaign, back a couple of years ago, I used Labyrinth Lord rules, and I kind of started finding myself doing the same thing I did with first edition Dungeons and Dragons, which was sit down and start, writing out a ton of house rules and stuff like that, changes that, changed a little bit of the flavor of the rules. And I kind of had to have a, stopping moment and say, hey, this is not what I got the game for, and that's where I made the switch to Castles and Crusades. I've read other books too, and again, it kind of struck me as, with the retro games that are coming out, it's simply a rehash of, first edition. And I've kind of evolved out of that a bit. I've kind of gotten spoiled to what offerings we have these days too. So, that's why I struggle with it a lot, because it's nice to look back on that time, but then again, the thing about it is that it's like an old girlfriend or something like that. You start playing the game and you start playing the game again, and you find out that, okay, that's not, or boyfriend, Kelly, don't want to leave out the fairer sex with this, but it's like,
can we just take a 5-minute break to make bad jokes about that analogy?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah, sure.
30-second speed rounds.
But
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But you're going back to something that you left a long time ago, and it's kind of hard to get back into that groove again. John,
Well,
how about you?
well, I played Labyrinth Lord, and it's like I enjoy it, but I just have fun role playing in general, so it doesn't like. But for me, a lot of the time is I get the books because I'm a little bit of a rules lawyer, and I'll buy a book just to read the rules, and I had no intention of playing it. And so I probably have like 50 or more PDFs of games I have no intention of ever playing that I've read through, and so I don't really have a. It's like I don't have an interest in going back and playing it because my only experience was ever D&D, and I realized probably only maybe a year ago that the fantasy that is DNC isn't the fantasy that I read in books. It doesn't match up with it, and it's one of those things where the mechanics, I can deal with mechanics, whatever they are, as long as I can understand and I know what I'm doing. That doesn't, and so I don't have to think about it, and I can just do whatever I want to do. That part I don't care, but it's like it's because D&D is what it is. It's its own genre, and I learned recently that that's my problem with D&D a lot of times, especially using any modules, or more so playing with other people who play D&D. They want Forgotten Realms. They want that genre that is D&D, and it's like, no, I want fantasy, and D&D fails to meet what I want out of fantasy. So I find myself playing games that aren't in a genre that I really want to play, because the systems meet the style of game I want to play. And so it's like I'm really enjoying a lot of role playing, but there's just not something out there that mirrors what I really want to play. And so it is like D&D isn't it, and that's why I'll DM D&D, because I'll make my own campaign, but I can't really play D&D with other people a lot of times, because a lot of people who play it come from a mentality of they're playing the D&D genre, they're not playing fantasy. And
John, I'm curious. What games have you found, or have you found any games that allow you to tell those kind of fantasy stories that you want?
Well, I mean, for me, it's been the simpler systems, but it's been simpler systems like Savage Worlds, or it's like I actually kind of was looking at the Serenity rule system. And it's like this similar to Savage Worlds, but it's more like the system is more like what I would like to use to do something in a fantasy game, where combat and out of combat actions are relatively similar. There's rules specific for combat, but in general, the out of combat stuff, exploration, and all those things are resolved in a more similar fashion. And so in D&D, there's a lot of weight put into combat, and then the out-of-combat system is not really handled the same way.
Right.
And so the systems that more mirror is, like, when I read a book, the writing style doesn't change when you enter into combat. But when you play something like D&D, it's almost like, it's like hard to say. It's like almost like the writing style changes, like how you approach it suddenly changes, and I don't like that.
I tend to kind of agree in a lot of ways. I do think there's kind of that barrier between combat and out-of-combat actions in a lot of popular role-playing games. So I see where you're coming from on that.
It's like, don't get me wrong, I like D&D. It's like I like the rule systems. It's just sometimes it's just like I'll see, like, if I could have this skill system and graft it onto this combat system, then I would love it. But it just most of the games that are about combat, the skill systems, I don't like them at all. And then vice versa, the ones that are really skill based, I mean, really like out of combat, like traits and things. Like I was just playing Mouse Guard the other day, and I was like, once we got to the combat situation, it just like, I want it to be simpler, but not this.
Yeah.
So that's hard for me to explain that. Yeah.
No, I've seen other people kind of have that hurdle with World of Darkness games, because a lot of times playing Werewolf, what we find is that there's a lot of cool things that we want to do or that we could do, but the best numerical bang for your buck is just shift to Krynos and bite the guy.
Yeah.
So I get where you're coming from there, and then heavier social games like that also sometimes don't do combat as well. So that is an issue that hopefully a very smart designer will solve one of these days.
Yeah. For all I know, I won't ever. It's something in my brain, and it will never be able to be solved. I don't know. When I see it, I'll know it.
Well, one thing I wanted to bring up too is Richard actually sent me a very interesting article that kind of went over a bit, kind of discussed the old school Renaissance and stuff like that. Could you talk about that a little bit, Richard?
Are you talking about that long-ass manifesto I wrote last week?
Well, yeah, I guess, yeah.
It was kind of prompted by an article that my friend Owen Stevens had posted. Owen's a veteran industry designer, a really nice guy, and he found this thing on Boing Boing. I think that the guy was saying that the old school Renaissance is really just guys in their basement who want to relive how awesome things were in the 70s and 80s, and it's never really going to go anywhere. And I kind of understand that attitude, because I do think there's a lot of people who are stuck in yesteryear and unable to evolve. I mean, Eric, you and I know people like that. We've gamed with people like that. And it is easy to get into that mindset, just as it's a lot easy for a lot of people to get locked into the newest is the best, and I must always play the latest edition of whatever my favorite game is, no matter how much fun I'm not having.
Yeah.
But so the guy kind of made a good point on that. And I think what characterizes the old school Renaissance right now is that we're looking for the one. There's a lot of retro clones and a lot of people who are kind of nodding to the past and trying to capture that zeitgeist, that lightning in a bottle. And none of them have really been able to do it yet. And I think that might actually be what it takes for OSR to really find a foothold moving forward. And it's muddied by the fact that Wizards of the Coast is almost tipping a lot of their hat to it in their design for D&D Next. I've only done a few play tests with some of the early versions of the rules, and I've read bits and pieces of the packages they've released since then, but it does seem like they're trying to say, hey, if you're an old school gamer, come back to the fold, we've got a place for you. And by all appearances, they seem to be doing a pretty good job of it. But I also think John might be more qualified to speak to that issue than me, because I know he play tests a heck of a lot of it.
Yeah, I'm actually doing at least one playtest a week, and each packet, so to this point, I think there's been at least one packet that was similar to a particular edition, and so it seemed like the first packet was clearly old school packet. The second one was kind of something that was probably closer to second edition, but they've been progressively every packet changing the style of the packet, the two previous packets and the packet before that one, like the third and fourth packet, had a lot of fourth edition in it. Not fourth edition as in this is our goals, but mechanics that looked like fourth edition, like
right.
the Tomb of Battle type stuff was being with maneuvers were pretty much the martial classes just got inundated with a lot of the maneuvers. And then this last packet they yanked out all the maneuvers and made fighters the third edition fighter where you're getting feats, and it's like, what's your mechanic? More feats. And so every packet has had a dramatic shift in how it's working, but I think they're doing that to test it. So I don't know necessarily if it's a nod to old school gamers, because I don't think we'll know that until it gets to beta, because they've been all over the place. Because when a fighter goes from being based off of maneuvers to suddenly being based off of feats, you can't really say that has anything to do with old school.
Well, the cornerstone of their fighter and rogue for at least one packet, I think, was the idea of rolling those additional damage dice. Like that seemed to be a big core issue, and I can't remember what they were calling that mechanic.
Yeah, and that was I think the third and fourth packet, and they've pretty much yanked that out and put it back to be a fighter thing and call it expertise dice. And
expertise dice, that's what.
Yeah, but they were called martial dice before. But when they yanked it out, it's like when it started as fighters in I think the second or third packet, and it was called expertise dice. Then they gave it to everybody in the next packet and changed it to martial dice. Like any class that was primarily fighting, or anyone who swung a weapon for any reason at some point, but basically like everybody but a wizard, got martial dice. And so then it got yanked, and they gave fighters expertise dice that are encounter based. And then there was maneuvers, and then they yanked maneuvers, and fighters are like feats and expertise dice. So it's like every packet they make these huge dramatic changes, so you can't really. It's like you can't really know where they're going with it.
Yeah.
Because sorry.
No, it's okay. I do think I think it's a good thing in a way, because they seem to be trying to make one system to rule them all, and if they're doing if they are reaching into that many pots of D&D and pulling it out and mixing it and seeing what sticks, that's kind of cool. Like you say, we don't know where they're going with it, but at least they're testing everything. At least they're really trying to find out what the majority of their players are going to want to sit down and play, and hopefully by the end of it, it's something that their market can stomach.
Yeah.
So I guess the jury's still out on next.
Yeah. So they're saying that they have about 8,000 people submitting surveys, and a lot of the feedback seems to dictate what not the next packet, but the packet after that will be focused on.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of the reasons why they're presenting it. Like they presented the old school D&D in the first packet, and then they got this surveys from it, and then they dramatically changed this system that didn't exist in any version of D&D. And then the next one was like something that was similar to fourth, almost like if you just took third edition out and it was just like second edition and fourth edition. And then the next one was kind of shifting towards like third edition and fourth edition. And this last one has been like almost, it was like, it would have been like if you made Tome of Battle, where it's third edition, but they have a couple of encounter-based resources that you can refresh, which was the third edition construct.
Yeah.
And so they're making dramatic changes, but it's all being like the feedback, or at least this is what they're saying. And so far, it's been shown to be true in the last few packets that every survey affects 2 packets down the road.
Yeah, that makes sense because they're developing constantly. Like they're developing today while they're talking about what they're doing tomorrow, and you're reading what they did yesterday.
Yeah, so I think the kits from second edition are going to be a big part of next, because I think that's the only way they can get around the hurdle of how do you have someone from first edition make a character that they can play with someone from like third or fourth edition.
Yeah, because they're essentially saying that the more complex the game gets, if somebody wants to sit down but doesn't maybe know that rules module, because it will be a modular system, that, well, you slap this kit on here and you get what you need to be able to sit and perform at this table. And that's kind of neat in a way, because then players who come from different playstyle backgrounds could, theoretically interact a lot more smoothly.
Yeah, so right now they're giving the options where you don't have to use the feat system, if you don't, you automatically get these extra ability score bumps. But if you use feats, you can instead use those feat. You can use a feat system instead of getting those ability score bumps. You can opt to get those ability score bumps or get other feats in lieu of the ability score bumps.
So if you like second edition AD&D kits, play D&D next.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and so the subclasses are going to allow them to create kits that make a more third edition character, and kits that lets you make a more fourth edition character, and kits that will give you old D&D or first or second edition, and they're all under an archetype that if you really wanted to play an old school game, you don't use subclasses. You just use the fighter they get, these are the things that all fighters have, and if you don't play with the rules for the rest of the stuff, if you just throw out the sub classes, you're playing basic D&D. And so they're adding things in layers. So I think that can work, but it's all on how they deliver it.
So they seem like they're kind of digging in and trying to transform the game basically into something like what we talked about before, Richard, which was like Castles and Crusades, which was something that could appeal to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about D&D next. I'm kind of burned out by D&D right now, but I have to admit, from what I've heard, it sounds pretty good. And the concept of them bringing back kits is wonderful. I thought that was one of the big things in second edition that really set the game apart.
Yeah, I think some of the issues is going to be this. I think I had the same conversation when I was talking on a very large screen in Richards and Barb house about. I think the biggest hurdle they have to get by is how people saw their character in older versions of D&D versus new ones. Because, like I was saying, when I was playing old D&D, first edition and second edition, your class was the defining characteristic about your character. And in third and fourth edition, feats are kind of the defining characteristic of your character. Because customization is... customizing and having a unique character is more of a priority in third and fourth edition, whereas who you were or what class you were was the defining characteristic. And because it's like if you were a fighter, that is the defining characteristic. If you had the one of the supplements and you're a monk, that's your defining characteristic. Like, if you're a Sand Raider in the Al Qadim Adventures, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but
close enough.
You are a Sand Raider, and that's the defining characteristic. Whereas in third and fourth edition is like, you're the Trip Master fighter who trips everyone he hits, and that's kind of ends up being your defining characteristic. And it's more, so it's more of the feats that make you who you are.
All right. Kind of a question to everybody. If you had to create a game on your own that you wanted to bring in all of what you wanted to encapsulate as a old school game, what kind of game would you build? Richard.
You take someone else first.
Gotta think on that one.
Yeah.
Tom. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, I'm thinking. I wasn't expecting that question.
But yeah, it's just what if you were building that you're getting back to your basics and you're building a game that attracted everything that you liked about old school gaming, but kind of left off what you really wanted to escape from it. What kind of game would you build?
Archetype-based characters with random encounter generators.
Random encounters.
Oh, so you're like the dungeon bastard. Yeah, have you ever read and listened to his podcast? You'd love it. He's got a Kickstarter for the worst dungeon ever. And basically, where he describes it by ripping into how terrible it is because it's not 74 rooms of monster killing. And so basically everything that he rips the worst dungeon ever by saying, yeah, sure, it's not 74 rooms of monsters to be slaughtered with no reason for them to be in there at all. Like, why is this like ogre just standing in the middle of the room? Who cares? We're just gonna kill it.
So I just posted a link to that.
Yeah, I think I may have just got my next Kickstarter. Thank you.
Yeah, I just posted a link to that because I love the Dungeon Bastard. He is really, really funny. And the adventure title is epic. It's called Flaming Death Pits of the Minotaur Mage, Descent into Doomfire, ! I really feel that the punctuation is important to enunciate there.
Yeah, it is. And if you could, I think it was if you bought into it early, you got an official Dungeon Bastard headband because that's valuable.
And you would look sharp in that, Tom. You'd be dead sexy, sir.
Yeah, so I guess, if I wanted to get a game that brought back the nostalgia for me, it would be that whole massive dungeon crawl, or you're trapped in the woods thing with random encounter tables, and who cares if there's rhyme and reason. Geomorphs were great. I almost went for the geomorph dice on Kickstarter, just for the nostalgia's sake.
Yeah, I remember the geomorphs very well. I used them extensively, actually.
You know, with some planning, they're pretty good. If you're just rolling on the chart that says, okay, now put square D5 or pentagon, I guess, or hexagon, D5. Yeah, it doesn't work out so well. You end up going in circles and stuff, but it was fun back in the day. So,
how about you, Kelly? Sorry about that, Tom. Go ahead.
Well, that is what I'm doing, actually. I mean, because that's what we've been talking about when we get together and talk about DMing. I'm getting everything that I love, everything that I miss from second ed, and pulling it over. Not so sure about THACO, having to work like THACO. Don't love that. There are a few things that I'm so happy to leave behind, like the skill system in second ed.
Yeah.
But things just seemed bigger and scarier in the road. The road was so scary to travel on in second ed. And it seems like third ed, no big deal. And I want to get that life and death and the epic proportions of, wow, you have a 13 strength, you're a hero, back to a game.
If you roll stats in 3rd or 4th edition, you'll get that. I assure you.
But the problem
go ahead, Eric.
But the problem with that, and I have to agree with Kelly, because I've gamed with a lot of people now that started off with 3rd edition, and I tried to apply the you roll for your stats, and I get a lot of poo-pooing on it because they don't get to design the character that they want, and if they don't have like 2 stats that are 16 or above, that character is going to die or never amount to anything. And I find that to be a kind of a prevalent, a thought these days. And I think it's something that's kind of born out of the 3rd edition. Whereas, back in the old days, if you had like
back in my day.
Yeah, back in my day, if you had any one stat over 12, you were doing pretty good. How about you, Richard?
I agree with Tom to a large extent on the archetype based. I kind of like the idea of the system, if we want to talk about an OSR, make your own OSR, something where your class defines you. That is the cornerstone of what you are. But that should not be the cornerstone of who you are. I do think that positive scale armor class and 2-hit systems were a godsend. It really probably should have been done that way all along. And I see no reason to go back to the old THACO or look up a big table and count down from 10 on how high your armor class is. I think that's retrograde. I kind of like the idea of pulling in more modern concepts, though. But then, I guess that doesn't really make it an OSR system. The dungeon as the cornerstone is big to me. Is a dungeon that is functional and logical, and yet filled with lots of really cool things for a party of characters to do. And there's so few dungeons in the history of the game that have really managed to pull that off and make people feel immersed and feel like what they're doing is logically consistent, but they're also having fun and feeling the edge of danger the whole way. I think White Plume did it. The Mud Sorcerer's Tomb did a good job of it. Return to the Tomb of Horrors has some really good bits in it. Not so much the original, which is just a meat grinder in its purest form. And I can't think of a whole lot of New School dungeons that I would really tack up there as being exemplary of that. that quality.
Elemental Evil?
I never played through Elemental Evil. I tried to read it, and it's big, and it may very well have good internal consistency. It was not one that really grabbed my attention. But I may have to go back and revise that opinion when I've got time to read all of it.
Well, how about you, John? If you had to...
So my issue is that depends on the day of the week what I would want from a game, but purely like based off of if we're talking about old school D&D, my problem is old school D&D did what I wanted to do. It just did it in supplements that old school D&D players like blow a gasket about. It's like old school D&D had Bloodmoor Abbey, I think, where you had the monk adventures, where you had all the super natural monks can do all these things. And yes, I did write this sentence that says they're not using magic at all. Suck it. But the people who played old school are like, oh, that's not real D&D, even though it's like the second supplement for old D&D. So the problem is old D&D does everything I wanted. It just does it in supplements that people who play old school try to deny exist. Like, I love Oriental Adventures. I love Bloodmoor Abbey. It introduced the monk and the assassin. And yes, the assassin was a ninja. Suck it. Second supplement after Greyhawk. Like, and I sit there constantly having these arguments with people who are old school because they play second edition, trying to tell me that that type of adventure isn't really D&D, but it existed before what they played. And so I liked second edition with Oriental Adventures. I liked old D&D when it was Bloodmoor Abbey. I might.
I think John is talking about.
Let me find it. I have it. I'll find the name of it. It's Bloodmoor or Blackmoor?
Blackmoor.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I meant.
And I know your name has two N's. I totally mistyped that.
Yeah, and that supplement was the second supplement they created. And Gary Gygax has a huge intro at the beginning of it because those are the exact things that he wanted in the game. Just like Oriental Adventures was written by it, and I sit here and talk to old school gamers that try to say, this high adventure with these superhero powers isn't anything that existed until 3rd and 4th edition. I was like, second supplement, you had monks dropping off of mountains and not dying because they're 8 feet or 10 feet from a rock. Therefore, they can drop 1,000 feet and not die. Well, and all those superhero stuff that people complain about, which existed in the beginning.
Well, and even in the Moldvay and Mincer versions of D&D, as it went on, and they did the basic, experts, champion, all those sets, it culminated in the Immortal set, where the idea was that if you had played a character from level 1 to 36, you eventually went on a grand quest to become a god. So, I mean, that kind of high-power play has always existed in one form or another, and, people have approximated it in different ways at different times.
Yeah, so it's like my biggest problem is I haven't been able to find the people who wanted to play with me, not necessarily the system. Because it's like, I'd say, I want to play second edition. I want to play Oriental Adventures. I can't find someone who wants to play second edition and Oriental Adventures together at the same time. Therefore, I don't really want to play second edition because that's what I liked about second edition. So it's like old school as a system, I'm fine with it. I could play second edition right now. I've been sitting here debating with one of my friends on whether we're going to give 5th edition a try or if we're going to just are we going to start second edition because back at second edition because I have a campaign that I was like, we're going to do side missions in second edition and we're going to do the primary campaign in 4th edition. And I was like,
sounds like a nightmare for a GM standpoint.
Well, I mean, I'm DMing it, so if it's a nightmare, it's a nightmare for which I brought upon myself.
True.
So it's like I'm debating like, will I do it in second edition or fifth edition? Because it's like I don't. It's like I've gotten to the point where I'm not playing D&D in groups. I'm playing D&D with one other person because that's all I can find that for people who want to play D&D the way I would like to play. So it's been like I liked old D&D, but I don't like old D&D players.
John likes Fakos. Right, John?
I think what you ought to do is post like a try it out that's like everything John loves about D&D and see who signs up for it and tell them what they're getting into up front. And, those who survive the cull, like, have you tried doing that, honestly?
I mean, I posted I wanted to do the playtest, and I said everything I wanted to accomplish in it, and I got people signing up and then not showing up. So it's like I tried recruiting people that I was playing other games with, and it never really worked out. So I just got to the point and was like, well, I'll just play with my son. Because my son's all about the Power Rangers, so I have to reel him in versus I have to pull someone else out their shell. It's a lot easier for me to try to reel someone in a little bit than try to pull someone out of like, monks aren't European. They're not knights. I don't want to play with them. They're not real D&D. So
These people would have real problems in my gaming group, man.
Oh,
you wouldn't believe how many people who asked about when I was posting that I was doing a playtest, how much like vitriol and grognardism I got from 5th edition discussion. Like none of them ever participated. It's like they just wanted to have a chance to sound off about their opinions about D&D.
No, you got the edition war people.
Yeah, so that's mainly why I canceled all the rest of my playtest stuff. And I was like, man, I didn't sign up for this to give people an opportunity to come bash me about D&D. I even had someone who only plays World of Darkness come bash me about D&D.
I didn't design the game. I just want to run it.
All right. Thank you. That's exactly how I felt.
well, that's one thing I never really got into is the edition wars, but some people get really, they get really into it, and to me, you're looking at essentially 3 or 4 different games to begin with. First edition and second edition have their similarities, but they're different. They're in their own right. Then you have third edition, which to me is a great game. I like it, well enough. And then you have fourth edition, which is a break a little bit from third edition. And but there's people that I just don't really get into the mentality of arguing about a version of a game. I never could understand that. Any reflections on edition wars? Richard?
Well, I'm told that in all ages there is a war when the edition change occurs,
Mm-hmm.
and not the eldest of magics can avoid this calamity. I mean, I'm told that there was a horrible rift even between first and second, and I was just too young to have even known about it. I can see it now in retrospect, especially from a developer and designer standpoint, when I look back at those products and I go, wow, yeah, I bet this pissed a lot of people off. Second to third, I don't think was that bad of a leap. I mean, it may have been, but like compared to the leap from third to fourth, yeah, and I John, I'm sure you're right on that. But dude, you gotta get with me that the third versus fourth ed thing just got out of hand.
Well, that's because you haven't seen some of the bulletin board stuff from second to third. I mean, it's really the internet is the only reason that you feel that way, because some of the bulletin boards about to change from second to third was, I mean, it was like threats being made towards people. And just like first to second edition, there's a reason why the monk isn't in second edition, but it was a first edition character. I mean, and it's like so it almost were like things that were bordering on monks aren't European enough. They have to be removed. And that's why they were removed.
I had never heard that argument before. And I know a lot of stuff got stripped out of second ed because they were trying to sanitize it. You know, the demon devil going to the Tanari Batezu thing, which I actually love that terminology. I still use it in my games. I still refer to demons and devils as Tanari and Batezu.
I think this is like one of the demons. There's a podcast that they just had with one of the developers in first and second edition. I can't remember his first name. Winters. I can't remember.
Winters.
Steve Winters. He has they did a podcast. Mike Merle did an interview of him, and he's talking about some of the things that happened in first and second edition, where they were talking about things like the effectively Oriental Adventures kind of sits where like Tomb of Battle sits for third edition. Where they're talking about they put a lot of cool stuff that they wanted to put in that they weren't allowed to put in the core into Oriental Adventures. Similar things were done for Tomb of Battle, and they were too controversial to be part of the core. And he was talking about some of the things like how monks got removed purely because they weren't a European construct, and some other things. He goes, it's like maybe like a 30-minute hour podcast where he talks about some of the design constraints they had and some of the things they did and why. And man, it's just like I think Rodney, one of the developers for D&D, the head developer, he's like gushes over like the I can't pronounce it.
It's Al-Qadim, I think, or Al-Qadim, something like that.
It was Al-Qadim. Okay, so I was saying it right. Al-Qadim Invention. He's like gushes over in that setting for like 20 minutes. And then they go over how that was one of the first settings where it was planned from beginning to end. Like before the first book was released, they had designed it from beginning to end. And so a lot of people, like you hear, like a lot of it, I've heard like those adventures weren't good. That's how come more material wasn't created. And they're like, we had designed everything that you ever needed to do in that setting. And then after it was all developed, it was released over a 3-year period, and there was nothing else that needed to be released for it, and that's why nothing more got released. Like things like that. So some of the things they were doing internally, it was an interesting podcast.
Yeah.
I think it's the last one that Wizard of the Coast did. If you're like interested in looking at it all, I'll see if I can find a link to it.
Yeah, because they had a new one up this week, and I don't know if that was the one. Something about it that caught my eye. And now I'm wondering if that was the same podcast. The thing that I noticed in the 4th edition changeover was just a visceral reaction from 3rd ed players who felt like not only was the game changing in a fundamental way, but the way that they were being talked to by a company that they spent a lot of money with was changing. And you know, some of those complaints I think probably got taken a bit too far. I think people might have been a bit too sensitive about it, but some of them are valid. And I looked at a couple of the marketing decisions that Wizards made through that process and just went, why would you try to sell a product to someone like this? I don't understand what you're doing. I want to buy D&D. Why aren't you making me want to buy D&D?
Yeah, I think a lot of the complaints, like the marketing, how they was marketing, is more valid than a lot of the people who argue for 4th edition are willing to admit. There was a lot of, well, this edition fixes everything that was broken in 3rd edition type discussion, and it was like completely inappropriate for a company that was trying to make money. And that I'm a little concerned that they're repeating that with 5th edition, where they're like, they're like kind of throwing 4th edition under the bus. And I'm just concerned that if they haven't done anything like what they did between like 3rd and 4th edition, this is more of like they talked about a lot of it more there. Whereas in I think the fifth edition, they're not putting in a lot of fourth edition things unless they can somehow link it to some other third or second or first edition construct. Like healing surges are being called hit dice, and they're changed. They don't. It's like they, as a mechanic, are similar to fourth edition constructs, but they don't operate the same. And so they made a neutral paladin called a warden, which is nothing like fourth edition. So it's like these blatant things that are going to irritate you if you play fourth edition, because if your favorite class could somehow become another class with some alignment restriction. So it completely destroys the feel of the class. They're taking the name and just discarding everything fourth edition related and saying, "Oh well, we added this fourth edition thing. You should be happy."
Well, I think in a way though, third edition suffered kind of the same blow. I mean, the people that love to play warlocks in 3E didn't exactly love them when 4E came about. Just off the top of my head, and terminology for classes then changed too. So I don't think fifth ed's unique in that, but I understand where you're coming from on saying they're might be repeating some of their same mistakes, and I can see how 4E players feel a little bit thrown under the bus. I go about 2 or 3 times a month to a 4E game because I love the group of players that's there, and I enjoy getting together and just beating up monsters with a couple of people that I like being with once a week. Yeah. And for that game fulfills that need for me, and it clearly seems to fulfill that need for other players, and also fulfills their need to tell their own stories in their own way. So in that sense, there's less difference between players of different editions than a lot of folks want to make them out to be. So I get that. If you really liked that game and then they're making another game that was nothing like the game that you like, you might not want to buy into it. But they kind of did that last time too, and it doesn't seem to have fared well for them. So I can't really fault them for maybe steering the ship away from a second iceberg.
Yeah,
but maybe they didn't patch it after they hit the first one.
My concern is it's going to be a reoccurring event. That the next edition they're going to do the same thing, and it's going to be this repeating thing, because I don't think it's different. I just think the amount of bad marketing that was done is definitely scaled back in this one. It's like sorry.
Well, how do you think about that, Kelly? Just kind of weigh in on this.
Check your battery.
If you want to unmute, sorry. Well, I get mad. I mean, like, Bruce Banner mad. About what they did.
Rage!
Because I'm working on the other side of the counter. I'm getting stuff from the company saying, nicely, push these products hard while you can.
Yeah.
And I didn't appreciate it being on either side of the counter. It upset me for my regular customers who came in and were with Wizards ever since either D&D, AD&D, or Second Ed, who went all the way through 3.5, 4, but they did it because they liked the setting, they liked the flavor, and it's a company they believed in, never knowing all of the details. And now they are going to have to go to something else in order to do officially sanctioned events. So I get very upset, very defensive for my friends and my former customers. I don't think they were treated properly.
Where was your store located, by the way? Someone had told me that you owned a place, but I just forgot about it for tonight.
No, I didn't own it. It was just like my emotional baby. I was basically the assistant manager in Charleston, West Virginia.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, and so when you are on that side and you see the papers come in and it's time to do your orders, and you're looking and you're listening, really listening to what the people want. And there are people who are still playing Second Ed. and will never play anything but, because they felt financially gypped. So imagine people who went all the way through. I just, no, it really upsets me for them. But I think when it comes to individual play, it's really whatever people enjoy the most. And that people just shouldn't fight about that part. That's just stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always thought that D&D in itself, the versions tended to have a lifespan anyway. And I think the changes from first edition to second edition was great because I played first edition extensively, and when second edition come rolling around, I thought that was fantastic. I thought they introduced a lot of great things. Then when second edition had its lifespan and third edition kicked in, I thought third edition, man, this is the game that saves Dungeons and Dragons. But whenever the change came from third edition to fourth edition, I kind of really felt bad for fourth edition. I think it's a good game, but I don't think third edition was quite through yet when they introduced it. And I don't think players were quite done with it. It still had a lot of life to it, and basically Pathfinder kind of bears out that thought too, where you got a game like Pathfinder, it's more popular than the game that it's really born from. So
Yeah.
I just never, I never got into the edition wars, but I can see where the angst is between third edition and fourth edition players, and I thought fourth edition was simply a grab just to make the money,
I mean, they're trying to fix a mistake they made with the licensing, and they're not going to ever fix that mistake. But it's like they have to do something. They need that. The OGL kind of screwed them over as far as making money, and they need to make money. And I think that was a lot of reasons why they did what they did. I mean, I'm not going to argue about what's right or what's wrong, but they're trying to fix a situation that they shouldn't have gotten themselves in legally, which benefited the players.
The ironic thing about that is that the OGL is probably the worst business decision that they ever could have made, but it was like the best thing that ever could have happened to gamers. Like, everyone should thank Ryan Dancy for that really stupid idea.
Yeah. But unfortunately, they had, I mean, for a company that doesn't want to go bankrupt or have the line shelved, they had to do something. And while they didn't have to do what they did, it was effectively they bashed it and made it sound bad to try to get people away from the thing that wasn't making them money into something that could possibly make them money, and it just didn't work. I mean, it's like they made the mistake, and they're in a death spiral that they're not going to escape from, and they did whatever they thought they could to try to get out of it, and it was too late.
I don't know. I don't completely buy that. Especially if you look at Pathfinder. Pathfinder, for all intents and purposes, is still OGL, correct?
Correct.
It is. Yeah.
And look at where they're at right now. They're positioned beautifully.
Yeah, but they don't have to have the same profits that a Hasbro company has to make.
They don't, but what's amazing is how much of a market share they have, and by all metrics that I've heard that I would call reliable, they are outselling Wizards in terms of print, and have been for some time. Now they're not grossing as much. They probably may not even be netting as much, but a company of 40 people took down a Hasbro subsidiary just by giving people more of what was already in circulation and doing it really well, and that's amazing.
Yeah, but it's like they don't have to deal with a lot of the problems that D&D has to deal with.
Yeah, because they've got the freedom. They're not underneath Hasbro's thumb. There's not that pressure to use our IP the way we want it used and get these numbers. They can do the best that they want to do.
Yeah, and it's fortunate for them, and I mean, it's kind of fortunate for players that by being able to create experience and separate it from all the baggage that comes with being D&D, I mean, that's all you could ever hope for.
Yeah.
It's like they got all the benefit of being third edition without any of the baggage of not being first, second, old D&D or basic D&D or fourth edition or fifth edition.
Well,
But I mean, as soon as Pathfinder version 2 comes out, they get to start having that.
but that's a kind of an amazing, conversation too, because, back when I started, playing, Dungeons and Dragons, really role playing in itself was a cottage industry, even with DSR, which was the company that was Dungeons and Dragons at the time. And nowadays, you're talking lots and lots of box. So that kind of gives you an idea too, where role playing has kind of morphed into. It was cottage, then all of a sudden it's grown big, and it's now to the point to where you have to really bust a profit in order to keep a game going. And you're talking about huge bucks too. So that's one thing that's amazed me about role playing itself. It's how it's morphed into this. But I don't know. I can't think it's for the best either. It's great that there's a lot of money into it because you get a lot of good games and stuff like that. But sometimes my grognard heart kind of wishes for simpler and smaller times.
Yeah.
But anyway, we got about 5 more minutes. Is there any final thoughts to any old school gaming that you would want to throw out on the table before we go? Kelly.
I don't know. I was just thinking about that. And I think I missed the way magic works just a little bit in the older versions of D&D. I mean, I don't think that I should have to make a magical torch that never burns out, lose my con, and die. But for them to go, yeah, that's really draining, or something like that, sure. I don't know, just a random thought.
Yeah. How about you, Richard? What's your final thought here?
If you want old school gaming in a nutshell, no matter what system you're playing or what edition you favor, check out the Mud Sorcerer's Tomb. It's originally was published in Dungeon Magazine for first edition. It was updated to third in Dungeon Magazine by Paizo, and Wizards has released it again, I believe, updated for D&D Next Rules. That unfortunately kind of leaves fourth edition players in the lurch, and I would love to see someone do a conversion of it. But it's what a dungeon crawl should be. It's not about heroes going in and being epic and saving the day. It's about a group of people who want money very badly and go through some very horrible things to get it. Run the Mud Sorcerer's Tomb, read it, or get someone to run it so you can play it. And that's my final thought. That's OSR to me.
All right, John.
Well, first the comment about that they have actually done some conversions for D&D Next to 4th edition. I don't think they have that particular one converted, but I think now they're getting to the point where they're releasing dungeon articles that give you instructions on how to convert it back and forth either way. So one of the benefits is a lot of that work will work exactly. That's a lot of that same conversion will work on first edition and second edition games, which will, I mean, it's not going to work converting third to fourth. That's just an impossibility. But for second edition or fifth edition, you'll be able to have a pretty decent set of ideas on how to convert it, which is good. Now for me, it's like I am the exact opposite about Magic. Magic is the reason I stopped playing D&D, and it's just like I don't like playing Magic classes, and I felt like by not playing Magic classes, I was a bunch of equipment slots that I was piecing together a giant robot, and that made me quit playing D&D. because it's like I never played third edition, but the whole idea that your class is equipment slots and feat slots, your fighter is a bunch of equipment slots and feat slots, made me not even want to try it. And so fourth edition isn't a whole lot better, but with the Dark Sun, when they released Dark Sun, it made it possible that you don't have to use magic items. So for me, it's like old school to me represented, if you liked wizards, you had fun after 6th level. If you didn't like wizards, you had fun until 6th level. And I am a epic level adventurer stuck playing a class that is off the turnip truck in terms of power. That's what really old school means to me.
All right.
That's dark.
Well, I hate that Tom kind of missed this last part and everything, but he can catch up with it on our broadcast. But anyway, I'd like to wrap this up by saying thanks to everybody for kind of throwing in on this, and hopefully I'll be able to expand it to more workshops or discussions, and go on with old school a little bit. I was hoping a couple more people would come in. I really wanted to get a reflection off of Rick Steves, who is actually not played anything but first edition D&D until currently. So you're talking about somebody who's really stuck on a version, but he never made it. So unfortunately, that would have been a pretty valuable contribution to this. But anyway, though, I appreciate y'all coming in and throwing your opinions about and everything like that. And I'll put the next one on the schedule, and we'll go from there.
Awesome sauce, man. I've had a good time tonight.
I had a great time too.
I hope I didn't talk too much. I know I tend to do that. Rein myself in.
That's all right. As long as you recognize that, then I'm not going to feel bad if I shut you down.
Oh, that's fine.
Well,
someone has to stop me because I won't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed the Alcadine, part too. I didn't know that, but that makes me want to listen to that podcast.
Oh man, it's worth it to listen to. It's very good.
Yeah. I don't know if when people look at this archive video they can see our group chat or not, but I've been trying to throw up links relevant to what we've been discussing throughout the night.
I think they can.
I'll copy that link and throw it on the page for this meetup.
Okay.
And then we got that on record in case anybody wants to check it out.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, thanks a lot, guys, and I'm going to end our broadcast right now.
All right.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.